There we go.
Hello, and welcome everybody to COVID Proof, your ethics and compliance program. Can I give a couple of seconds for folks to come on in? Welcome to COVID Proof, your ethics and compliance program. We're going to go ahead and get started just now. All right. So hopefully you all are seeing on your screen. We're going to talk a little bit about what it means to COVID-proof your ethics and compliance program. And when I say COVID-proof, I don't want to just limit our conversation to COVID. In fact, this is really going to be all about some of the best practices that we can glean from having lived through a once in 100-year type of event. And I am honored that you selected this conference today, and just encourage you to walk through it with me. I'm somebody that likes a bit of a roadmap, and so I've got some 3 buckets that we'll walk through. But I also want to share a little bit about my own personal journey in managing a pandemic as an ethics and compliance professional, and some of the things and the roles that we have to play to successfully navigate it. Some of the ways that I've skinned my knee and have learned, and hopefully we can share some best practices by the end of our time together. A little bit about me. My name is Guy Londo Moreno, but everybody calls me Guy. And I serve as the Vice President of Compliance for Progress Rail, which is Caterpillar's rail division. And unlike many of you, I've got a number of risk areas that are under my umbrella, everything from anti-bribery to fair competition, to data privacy, to trade compliance, both import and export. If it has some sort of a regulatory touch point, it's likely me or somebody on my team that has ultimate responsibility for it. Also responsible for our risk assessment process, our learning management process, and like many of you, implementing an ethics and compliance framework for our companies. For me, my division. I have a team of about 30 compliance professionals that really help me navigate all of these waters that are globally located. And I'm an attorney by training who also likes to dabble in business. But enough about me. Actually, I want some logistics, and I have some questions for you. So throughout the course of our time together, I really do welcome some feedback. I hate being just a talking head with no connection to you all. And so I really do want to understand where you all are at, and have a few poll questions littered throughout here. I think you all by now are familiar with the trend, go to where you launched the site and answer those questions. Feel free to answer them now. I'll give a little bit of time to answer them as we go. And as a test case, I've got one for you right now. I'm curious what industries are in the room. What are your companies dabbling in? I'm very interested because the pandemic affected us differently. And so I like to know who's represented today. Aaron, do you have a update there?
Yeah, let's see. So we've got, might need to give it a second here to make sure everyone's some time. So far, we've got healthcare, finance and insurance, agriculture. A few people selected other, but those seem to be the big ones at the moment.
Okay. Awesome. And then I'm going to learn a little bit more about you all. I'm curious, are your companies domestic or multinational?
All right. And we've got 60% domestic, 40% multinational.
Okay. Okay. All right. Another one for you all. How big are your compliance organizations? I know many of us may be in sort of legal and compliance. Some may bifurcate those two, but are you a one-man band, or do you got an army at your disposal? So just very curious what our organizations are looking like.
Sure. Right now, 33% for 1 to 4, and then 17% for 5 to 9, but then 33% also 31 plus. So.
All right, so we've got some pretty big organizations here. We run the gambit, which is awesome, and I think there's a lot to be learned. So thank you all. You showed me yours, I'll show you mine. What about the rail industry. So many people, when they think about Caterpillar, they're thinking about big yellow construction equipment, and that is true. But actually, little people know that there's also a rail division, or an energy and transportation segment, in which the rail division sits. And they sell everything from locomotives to track work to signaling equipment and the like. And so that is the division that I'm responsible for. That group has a global presence. It is a multinational in its own right. You can see here we've got about 16 countries where we have operations, about 8,000 employees, and that division is headquartered in Albertville, Alabama. But it's truly multinational, a direct sales business. And as we said at the outset, my job is to implement an effective risk model, an ethics and compliance framework for the division. And as you can see here, I know many of us have a number of them. The one that I'm most privy to is there on the screen. Really one that requires us to have a keen understanding of the external environment that we're going to be navigating, understanding the impact on our specific business and how we conduct business and how we offer services and our products. Also, the heart of our job is developing those policies, procedures, controls, training to make sure that we manage that risk, and then communicating and effectively assessing and auditing it. So put a pin in it. I know there's been a lot of really good presentations today looking at different elements of that model, but you know, it'll be relevant as we're navigating the pandemic. All right, so the first step is really all about assessing the impact. And to do that, I'm going to invite all of you to go on a little bit of a time warp with me. I need you to kind of remember where you were in about March, early to mid-March of last year, when it became very real to a number of us that this is not something that is going to be contained in China. When the reports, we recognize that they've been in our own backyard for a little bit longer time. When we start to see these disruptions to our supply chain, when there are these micro and macroeconomic impacts starting to be forecasted by our business, when our employees are really coming to the appreciation that, hey, I got to work from home, and you have all of these immediate health and safety considerations and different legislation coming from state and local officials. For me, this was a season of rapidly developing chaos. And I want us to lean into that for a second, because it's absolutely critical, the role that we play in the middle of a crisis. I just want to share my experience, because as part of a publicly traded company, we have a duty to disclose some of these things. And what you can see, and I apologize for the small font, is the press release that got released by my company on March 26th, where you can see that we're already anticipating an impact to our supply chain, where uncertain economic conditions are forcing us to forecast a weaker demand for our product, supply chain constraints. The government actions are also going to cause us to suspend operation at some of our facilities. And the impact and the fluidity of the situation made it very difficult to predict, you know, what the forecast would be. It was chaos. You know, in a word, it was alarming. And if you're part of a leadership team and you are helping to try to establish the tone at the top in the middle of a catastrophic event, what role do we play as ethics and compliance professionals? What can we learn from a season like that? Because yes, it's a once in a lifetime sort of event, but who knows what the next one will be, that is systemic, that is global, that is this disruptive to not just one location, right? You may have a tornado or a floodplain sort of a situation, but that affects nearly every single facility, operation, customer that we have. And what are we to do to lean into that? You can see there just some of the major considerations, but I think our role in these times are crisis managers. No, for me, it was about funneling this chaos through the lens of my code of conduct. Ours is called our values in action, and allow that to be a part of the decision-making framework that's going to help us in this immediate response situation, right? Making sure that as we formed a COVID task force, that we're being very cross-functional. As we're thinking about, these travel restrictions, that we're studying the rapidly developing regulatory landscape and figuring out, are we or are we not an essential supplier and have essential workers? Do we remain, keep a facility open? And if we do, making sure that the health and the safety of our workforce is first priority. As we're shifting to a remote work environment, what sort of considerations come into bear? What sort of pandemic benefits do we offer our employees? What sort of communications have to come out? And as you're in that environment, how are you leading that tone at the top to drive that sort of a thing? I see some questions coming in. Let's see. Okay, got a good question just about the My Workspace. So thank you, Nina, for that. I love them. I love the questions. Yes, 30 full-time employees are a part of my organization globally. So actually, and if I count some of the indirect reports, I kind of steal and borrow from some other functional areas. It may be about 35 full-time dedicated employees. Oh, good questions. How do you balance the need to succeed financially with the safety of the workforce? Excellent question, because this is why we as ethics and compliance professionals have to do that, right? We made the decision that we're going to keep a lot of our facilities open and operating, but we have to do so in the safest manner possible. And so for those individuals that were allowed to work from home, the decision is made, hey, let's let them go, right? But certain job roles and function, we are a large manufacturer. I can't move my assembly line. I can't move my production facility to home. And so for those workers, what sort of additional safety checks do we put in place to ensure that we're preventing the spread of this virus? Those are sort of the decisions that you have to make, and then making sure that that ethical framework is in play. These are some of the key takeaways from that season that are really going to help. One, it is rapidly developing chaos, and we are some of the people that folks need to come to as a steady hand. That executive presence, that calming force, the unchanging nature of our code of conduct, which we are espousing, needs to be there. The messaging that's coming out needs to make sure that it has us there too. So I oftentimes am going to be a sounding board. I may not be the only one making a decision, but I need to be a part of that decision-making process. And what I add to that conversation and to those major decisions needs to make sure that it's undergirded and reminding my team, which is already really well saturated in our values, why, but how we also message that into a very concerned workforce, that everything is going to be okay, or that at least we're going to do the best we can to navigate this together, I think breeds a lot of trust in these sort of chaotic environments. The other key takeaway, I think it's important for us, is that we got to be cross-functional. We are not on an island. And so one of the strengths that I think I learned from this season, and encourage others if there's another major event, is to make sure you get those necessary people at the table. This is an HR conversation. This is a sales and marketing conversation. This is an executive office conversation. This is going to take some feedback from the front lines conversation, but that you are representing very strongly why your ethics, your compliance, your code of conduct, your regulatory frameworks need to be consulted as you're making these very rapid decisions. And because they're so rapid, you need to make sure that you're driving that values-driven leadership and those ethical considerations into these things. And oftentimes saying, let's slow down, let's think about this, let's think about the reputational risk, let's benchmark. But our roles are really in large measure going to kind of keep a stabilizing and an anchoring force in an otherwise very chaotic moment in the company's history. And to that question, again, prioritization is going to be critical. Health and safety is an essential value. And so because of that, the decisions we make have to always align with that. And then over communicate. If there's anything I know, it's going to be a lot of phone calls, a lot of meetings, a lot of tabletop exercises. But it's going to pay dividends when you all are aligned and really speaking with one voice to the broader organization. All right, good questions. I keep them coming, keep them coming. So I have a question for you. If you don't have one for me, we're now going to talk about, revenues. I'm very curious. Compared to 2019, what did your 2020 revenues look like? Some industries were really bolstered by this change and this uncertainty. Others struggled a bit, but I'm very curious what's the majority in our room. Aaron?
Right. Yeah, we're seeing 90% revenues increased and 10% decreased.
Wow. Wow. That is throwing me for a loop. I am jealous of the vast majority of you all, because for me, this was a season of pandemic woes. So, being a part of a publicly traded company, you can see anybody can access through the SEC or through my investor page, where we fared. But this is just pulling a snapshot from, our second quarter of 2020, closing it out. And you can see $10 billion of lost revenue, right? Compared to 2019. Operating profit margin dropped as well. Profit per share dropped as well. And if I take a closer look at that, just to give an example of the chaos that was happening to our balance sheet, you can see the biggest pain point was right there in that customer behavior, where sales is the biggest cause, right? My customers, Caterpillar's customers, got very skittish about buying these major capital investments in the middle of a pandemic. And it shows in our sales and revenue. The bright spots on there, even, which you can see that green, if you look at the bullets there, driven by short-term incentive compensation expense, is a nice way of saying that, hey, we're gonna pull back in bonuses that we had allocated originally to offset some of this pain that we're feeling. And so the major takeaway, though, is not just the balance sheet. I think in this season, and I'm calling pandemic woes, we're starting to see that this is not just something that's going to be done in a month, that this is now a sustained state. And there's more uncertainty as a result of it. Difficult decisions when you're in this environment have to be made. And it's doing more with less is part of the decision making that goes in. So while many may be experiencing profit, there may be others like myself that are in this rebudgeting phase and really evaluating, okay, what does my compliance budget look like? How do I allocate my resources? Do I have to make difficult decisions about my resources? How am I dealing with this prolonged remote work and the risk that make accompany that? What about this changing customer behavior, good or bad, and the continued pressure to take advantage of it, right? If you have an open floodgate, now there may be different expectations. Now we're ramping up very quickly. Am I doing so in a sustainable way? Am I hiring in a sustainable way in this pandemic environment? What are the resumed regulatory expectations that are happening in this space? The disruptions to my programs and my key controls, right? What is the impact to my hotline? And training and learning in this very new world, right? So this is now calling upon us as compliance professionals to be compliance strategists, master strategists, to take a look at these prolonged pandemic impacts, and like we did before, filter them through the lens of our ethics and compliance programs to arrive at more sustained solutions. Oh, I see some questions. Did the reduced revenue have an impact on the size of your team? And how do you make the case to keep ethics and compliance a priority with the reduced revenue? Excellent question. It did. It did. We did have to kind of reallocate some resources. And I did lose some people. There were some significant reductions in force across our enterprise, and my group was not unscathed by it. And so, we just had to make a critical decision. And so as I had to realign and reallocate those resources, I did so with a view towards, well, what are the biggest risks? What are the ones that I can do? And so in my specific example, I had already been making some investments in some automation and really had to pull that forward. It already had been maybe in a longer term plan that this automation could replace some of these key roles. And then we had to consolidate what we had left and rely on some of those things. But I think those are some of the difficult decisions that you're going to be forced to make in this sort of sustained environment. And yes, making sure that your leadership recognizes that, you can't cut whole cloth ethics and compliance, but also we have to realize that, we're not necessarily a compliance consultancy. I sell locomotives, I sell track work. And if I can't do that, then all of our revenue is going to go down. And so we're all making those very difficult decisions. And it can be very daunting because it's painful. It can be daunting because it's difficult, right? All in all, I think we made very risk-based decisions. But in these moments, it requires us to diagnose what those emerging risks are, to evaluate the existing control environment, to adapt our training, to enhance our communication strategies, and ultimately reevaluate our risk profile. And as we just discussed, reallocate resources to align with that new risk profile. So good questions. Keep them coming. That is a lot. That's a lot to do. And so where I really want to spend a lot of our time and invite some of your questions is to think about, how do you take those steps? Really give a framework to do that, because it's really all about defining a strategy. Given the resources that I have, given the risk profile that I see, what am I going to do to make sure that we can navigate this catastrophic event as best we can? One of the things I love about our roles, and I'm going to do a plug for this anytime I can, is that we have to be very in tune with the commercial strategy. Effective ethics and compliance professionals are those that understand their business strategic goals and imperatives and align and anticipate the risk that come from that and try to operationalize key controls as we're achieving those goals. So my commercial colleagues had already been thinking about a strategy to retain profitable growth, right? This is Caterpillar's enterprise strategy overall. But I need to be doing the same thing, filtering it through my program, and then beginning to develop a compliance strategy. The building blocks for that strategy are already there. We have our code of conduct. Our values should always be a basis for every decision that we make. We have a compliance and a risk model that we are held to execute. Just a reminder, mine looks like this. And then, as I titled this session, you have a risk assessment process. And the risk assessment is really going to rescue you because you can look through the lens of that. So when you have this chaos, you really want to make risk-based decisions, right? And you're going to do so using some of the building blocks that are already within your reach. So I referenced my preferred model before. This is it. You see it in the box. I tried to break out, well, what does that mean? And how is this going to help me define a pandemic, once in a lifetime, catastrophic event, long-term strategy? And one, those elements are still there. So one is looking at the external environment, right? We always have to keep one foot on top of the legal landscape and the frameworks that govern what we do. But the question now is you're looking at those things with an eye towards what sort of changes have occurred as a result of this catastrophic event, right? With a particular look at those legal and regulatory changes, the different enforcement priorities that the agencies are signaling, the evolving industry standards, and obviously the expectations around that particular regulated conduct that you're engaging in. right? So understanding that external environment and then understanding your internal impact. And really, I boil that into two buckets. One, how is that external environment going to affect what we're doing? In particular, my business strategy, conduct, and operations, right? Because this shift is going to result in a shift over here, and then we have to anticipate what controls have to be developed. And now I understand how that shift, how those changes are affecting my risk profile. Now I do the work of developing controls or modifying my existing controls to address that. And now that I've done those modifications, I need to make sure that my broader organization is aware, I'm communicating, I'm training to those things, and I'm going to audit and assess or really evaluate whether my continued monitoring program, whatever it may be, is going to capture those changes. The abstract is difficult, I understand. Oh, good question. I see another question that's coming in. I want to go ahead and answer that in real time. How much input do you seek from the commercial side? How do you maintain some level of independence and potentially pressure to cut corners to meet financial targets? Excellent, excellent question. So as I mentioned before, really, this is going to be a collaborative event. And so one of the best practice we've developed is in each one of my risk areas, I have a cross-functional team that I call a council. So I have an anti-bribery council, I have a data privacy council. We meet on different cadences, but that is really the infrastructure that we've developed to ensure that those key employees understand the changes that we have going on, and that I am getting a constant input from them about, the voice of the customer. How is what I'm envisioning going to affect you? It also is a two-way street. I also make sure that I have a seat at the table. So I tend to be one of the people that are in our operating council meetings, in our leadership team meetings, in the staff meetings with those sales and marketing leads, with our senior leadership, so that I can see what's coming down the pike. And I think that is essential for us, but not getting so close that I lose autonomy, right? Although I report to the leadership, I have very strong chains with our legal function, very strong lines with our enterprise chief compliance officer. And so at the end of the day, everyone knows that my duty is to make sure that we win, but we win the right way and not violate any laws or regulations in the process. And so, you have to make sure that you keep an eye out, and you tend to know which ones you have to keep on a shorter lease and others who are kind of 100%. But yes, we also do things like developing compliance champions and allies to also be our ears on the ground. And obviously, like many of you, have a hotline if some other behavior runs off course. But making sure that you have a good, keen connection with the commercial side is of critical importance. All right. But like I said, in the abstract, this is pretty daunting, but I wanted to walk us through an actual example. I just picked anti-bribery as one of our risk areas. And what does it look like to, in the first box, look at the external environment, right? This is the rules and the regulations that are going to be governing, this risk area. So what happened in the middle of the pandemic? I found it very interesting. For any of you all that are practicing in this space, you'll notice that some major pieces of agency guidance came out in the middle of the pandemic, right? The Department of Justice published its updated evaluation of corporate compliance programs. They also, the Department of Justice re-released the second edition of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Resource Guide it's not been updated in years. I think 2012 was the initial one. And I think that signaled to a lot of us that we need to be taking this risk seriously. We continue to see enforcement, right? 27 FCPA actions were filed in 2020. And so I think that reminds me that, you can't just take a step back. The DOJ is signaling that this is still a risk area and we're still going to prosecute it. And we saw a clustering of actions around intermediaries, right? I'm pulling that out. Agents, distributors, joint venture partners, resellers, other channel partners. We saw a clustering of activity around certain higher risk markets like China, Russia, India, Brazil, and Mexico, among others. And so to me, keeping a pulse on the external environment means that, the pandemic has not necessarily changed things, but maybe my business impact may be changing some things, but I'm seeing continued enforcement and I'm seeing continued signaling to look at your channel partners. That hasn't changed, but maybe the internal impact has changed. And so what do we mean by that? Well, by example, are we entering into new regions? Are we entering into new product offerings? Are there new acquisition opportunities? Are we having new distribution partners? We're seeing a continued focus on those channel partners. How am I onboarding them? And so given the heightened risk in these markets, I need to go and take a look and do maybe a bit of a deeper dive on partners. Are you going to be engaging a partner in this market, in this market, in this market, where we're seeing higher risk of corruption, particularly around pandemic? Then I'm going to go ahead and make sure I'm doing a bit more due diligence. If you're in some of those industries that are really hot right now, the OECD put out a study that looked at some of those things, and we're seeing certain industries, I think healthcare was one of ours, that there is abuse in some of these subsidies, right? There's these mad dash for healthcare resources, and that's driving some improper behavior. What am I doing to align our new sales revenue, our new customer base, with some of the higher risk that we're starting to see coming out from these additional flow of government funds, right? So I'm looking at my internal strategy. I'm looking at the enforcement environment. I'm seeing, there may be some additional steps that we need to take given the environment that we're in. And so what do those steps look like? Well, that means we're coming to the control environment. That means I'm looking about, are there any changes to my policies or procedures? Right? I mentioned, okay, I've got a procedure in place that makes me look at all of my third parties, my resellers, my channel partners, and do some level of due diligence on them before I engage them. I'm looking at some of their contract language, and I may beef it up in view of some of the sanctions that were released at the end of last year. I mentioned that, hey, now that we're doing a big drive, I may need to reallocate some of my personnel to look at these enhanced control requirements because I'm now, putting them towards more due diligence activities. And I may need to change some of my processes, right? One of those DOJ cases took a deeper look at, how are you managing your foreign subsidiaries? And are they doing the requisite level of due diligence on the payments they're making to these business partners? And so now I need to centralize some of those key processes as a result, and particularly in those markets that are causing me more concern. So these are just some hypothetical examples. And then now that I've changed some of those things, how do I make sure that the word gets out? And that's going to be through the training material. I've got a new payment process that I've instituted, new additional red flags that we're starting to see in the midst of this pandemic. Be on the lookout for these sorts of things. Make sure that these people are involved in all approval decisions. Make sure you have a more robust business justification if you're going to go into these markets with these types of partners. And making sure that I'm targeting that message to the audience that is at higher risk as a result of the changes that we're seeing. And for us, leveraging that tone at the top to make sure that it gets in the right position. All right, no new questions, gonna go on. And then of course, auditing and assessing. And for this one, it may not need to be disturbed, but consider your audit criteria. Has the enhanced risk, has the pandemic, has this catastrophic event changed the way that you need to do your audits in that particular risk area? How you execute your audits in that particular risk area? And getting feedback loops out to the extent privilege will allow it to other parts of your organization so that problems that you find over here can help you over there. So, I also want to just give some examples of other risk areas, right? The great thing about having a risk assessment process and using it to focus as a lens in the middle of a crisis or a prolonged pandemic is that you can just check through those with an eye towards how does this changing situation affect this particular risk. We walked through the anti-bribery example, but some other real world ones are data privacy, right? There's a huge rush towards making sure that we're doing these testing, that we're taking temperature information. But you know what? some of this information could fall into a classification that is entitled to greater protections. And so while my facilities are quick to want to make sure that they're keeping everybody healthy and safety, notification of somebody else's personal health information is a high risk. Or personally identifiable information may violate, in certain countries, their data privacy regulations. And so developing a checklist of when you're going to implement another sort of health and safety related control point to keep your workplace safe, that you do so in a way that doesn't run afoul of those data protection regulations. We discovered in our government contracts program that, hey, the disruptions to our supply chain are causing us to have to think critically. Can we meet these customer deadlines? Do we need to evaluate force majeure provisions? And what does that look like when you're doing business with the government? And what ripple effects can it have? And sort of what strategies are we developing so that we don't run afoul of any of our government contract requirements? We saw an uptick of people. While we have a predominantly work from home base, we're now starting to see that people are getting side hustles. People have more time, so to speak, or at least less supervised time. And so now maybe I'm working a lot of the day, but maybe I want to invest in my other hobby that was making me some money. And what sort of controls are we putting around there? What sort of training do we do about our conflicts of interest policy? And things of that nature, right? As we are also moving remote, we're seeing a heightened cybersecurity risk. Do I have appropriate IT controls in place so that I can allow my workforce to continue to work from home for a prolonged period of time? And for those that are accessing higher value technical information, what additional IT security controls need to be put in place to make sure that we're not getting exploited? And we're seeing an uptick in phishing schemes, taking advantage of things. What sort of training do we need to sort of put out there to highlight people what these things are looking like? And we mentioned the supply chain security and trade compliance, but we saw at the end of last year a number of sanctions things coming out, targeting, the liberalization. Please help me to import some medical stuff, but preventing me from exporting it. And we also saw trade being used in some very aggressive ways as a way for policy to be retained. And so for a global company, you have to be careful. Am I in Russia? What do the sectoral sanctions look like? Am I seeing military in-use requirements coming out of China? What sort of controls am I putting in place? So all of this is happening in the middle of the pandemic. It's prolonged, but I need to be taking steps to look through the lens of my risk evaluation process and have it be a guidepost for me, just checking them off one by one when I reallocate resources, when I change our priorities. Because for me, you all, I was done. I had done my risk evaluation process. I had put a bow on it. I presented it to my senior leaders, and then a pandemic hit and I had to readjust. And I think we have to be flexible. So some key takeaways from this, and I think we have a good question, but I'll get to that in a second, is this is the time to concentrate and think holistically. We're going to be in this for a while. I need to start thinking about the long term and the short term and make sure that I'm making the necessary adjustments to my program to address the heightened risk areas. I need to remain engaged and aware of the commercial strategy, because as they are pivoting, as they are changing, we need to be aligned right there with them, making sure that we're helping them navigate this dynamic landscape, see all of the roadblocks and the landmines that may be waiting out there for them, and to try to operationalize right alongside. And then leveraging those tools, the risk model and the assessment, to help you do so, and think about the long term, and then use it to accelerate innovation, which is a good segue to our next point. Before I get there, what are some of the main issues you've seen implementing training programs for new areas during COVID? We found it hard to get employees' attention, particularly when they're already under so much stress. Excellent question, because it already shows me that the asker has a pulse on the employees. And we experience that too. There's a little bit of fatigue. There's a little bit about burnout. All of our in-person training is now gone to the wayside. How are we going to address training? And that's an excellent segue. So I'm going to put a pin in that and give you a real world example, because I think, when you're in a pandemic, you're going to develop some best practices that come out of it, because necessity is the mother of invention. When your back is up against the wall, maybe some things have come out of it. So my next and last poll question is, did you develop new innovations as a result of the pandemic, or did you not develop new innovations? So Aaron, over to you. What's the score looking like?
All right. We've got everyone developed new innovations.
That's great. That's
So,
great. Because that's really one of the big takeaways from our time today is that don't waste this experience. I'm grateful and I wanted to do this because I want you all to do a similar sort of an exercise. When you look back, what you'll recognize is that much of this stuff, maybe you did it, maybe you didn't do it as a formulaic manner, but you were forced to do it one way or the other. But to glean from that, really an understanding and a framework and some best practices so that if another once in a lifetime event takes place under your watch, that you've got a playbook for it. And I hope, like me, and it sounds like you developed some really great opportunities. You took a problem and you turned it into an opportunity. And so for us, and I'm going to get back to my learning one, there were some innovations that came out of it that I am going to leverage. For one, internal audits. We had it when the pandemic came down. I literally was about to host our internal audit team the following week. And the decision was made that we're going to stop traveling. Oh, okay. Well, does that mean we're going to stop auditing? Because I've got a lot of regulators that have high expectations that I've got a program that I'm kicking the tires and making sure that it's still effective. And so how did we shift? Right. So for me, we went to some virtual audits. We had to get into a space where we got comfortable. And some audits you can do virtually. You can do these desktop audits very easily. You can grant access to the systems, but others, like environmental health and safety audits, where you literally got to go around the facility and make sure that it's safe, that there are no spills, that there are no hazardous sort of conditions, are a lot harder to do virtually. But I'm struggling with these competing interests. How do I maintain the safety of the audit team and the production team? I'm trying to space people out. I am following these guidelines, but I still have a countervailing interest in making sure that I am comfortable that the program is working as designed. And so one of the things is I'm going to start using cameras, right, to go around deputizing others to take a look at these conditions, right? Walking around the outsides of some of these facilities, looking through. I mean, we developed some pretty innovative things to make sure that we could get access to what we needed to get access to give ourselves reasonable assurance that those controls were working. Coming back to the question around training, we got really innovative about training. I have an annual ethics and compliance week, but prior to the pandemic, it was sort of a decentralized thing where I would get the slides together. I would deputize local leaders, but they would bring people together for an in-person ethics and compliance experience. We had mail campaigns, all sorts of other things that we were doing, but we had to pivot. And so what did we do? Well, we took it virtual. And we had to get really creative. What you see on the screen is me talking to our chief executive officer. But what you also see is me stylizing it as a late night talk show host, where I did a lot of tongue in cheek. It is still to this day one of the most clicked on sort of a thing. And people looked forward to it every day for that week. We released a new episode and they absolutely loved it. I can no longer go back to the old way because there's an expectation that we bring back the guys compliance corner, as we called it, because they just loved it so much. And so that, format was one that we never would have considered. And now it's one that I can never get away from in large measure because there's an expectation and there's a bar that's been set as a result of it. And so, yes, that was one of the ways in answer to the question that we got to re-engage a COVID fatigued workforce and to do so in a creative and an engaging way. And so, I think you are going to have to revisit, how do you do training? How do you get your employees' attention? How are you connecting with them in ways that you may have not done before? We had already started before the pandemic releasing kind of connecting with our employees through an app. And so we pushed that out even further. And so in the middle of the pandemic, we're rolling out our Win the Right Way app and encouraging our employees to download it, right? You can get it on Google Play or Apple the App Store on Apple. But that was another way that we're like, you know what? I can't bring the ethics and I can't bring you to the program, but I'm going to bring the program to you. And so, from your phone, you can go and take a look at some of the highlights, some quick learning modules and scenarios, some do's and some don'ts, key points of contact. Through the phone, I can do my training and log your attendance. Through the app, I can also, you with a click of a button, can reach out to me. You can reach out to our lead counsel responsible for some of these areas and get your questions asked. It's our way of trying to bring the program a little bit closer to our workforce. And we wouldn't have pushed it out so fast and enhanced it as quickly had we not been in that environment. But it allowed us just another opportunity and a touch point to leverage technology to get to the workforce. All right. So some of the key pandemic takeaways, I think when you're thinking about innovation, be ready to adapt, be ready to change course, be flexible, be nimble, and to really think about your challenges and your problems is a new way to break the rules. Well, that's probably bad for an ethics and compliance person to say. I'll say break the orthodoxies, break this is how we've always done it, to give yourself a novel approach. And I really want us to use this as an opportunity to press reset, right? I know as ethics and risk professional, we often aren't known as the group that is innovating. We're often not deemed the one that's willing to take a risk. But I want us to be encouraged to use these once in a lifetime moments to think about, how do I change the way I've done it? And maybe in the process, begin to learn a lot more lessons that you're going to be able to carry forward into the next generation. And for me, when you think about those innovations, make sure that you're using all of your allies. I developed that show really through reaching out to our sales and our marketing team. We have an in-house department that is always sort of capturing the trade shows, developing the materials, putting forth, all of the marketing. And they were stuck, right? Nobody's going on road shows. Nobody's going to trade shows. They've got some capacity. Hey, help me make a compliance talk show. And all I did was come up with a little bit of a script, and all these creatives surrounded me and started to develop more of it. So use your compliance allies, use the audit function, use IT to start to develop some of those things that maybe before you didn't have enough justification, but that crisis adds a little bit more credibility and legitimacy to your business justification to make some of those changes, to give you a chance to press reset, to get the attention of your senior leadership, to resensitize people to the compliance message, and you have a different angle to do it from. So let's not waste the opportunity. Let's use it to drive sensitivity and greater awareness. And then take those things and don't waste them, carry them forward, use them. Okay, we're still hopefully nearing the end of this, but my hope is that because all of you had so many innovations that came from it, that you won't drop them, that you'll continue to use them and further enhance them if they're making your businesses better. All right. And with that, I'll turn it over to any questions and answers or observations or other insights that you all have. Aaron, I don't know if people are able to take themselves off of mute and ask questions. I love to hear voices. But type into the chat feature, but excited to have and hear a lot about what others have done, or other best practices to navigate this crazy season that we're all in.
Yeah. So if we can, just through the chat, if anyone has any questions they want to pass along.
And I'm going through your other ones just to make sure I got all those. Got the industry.
Well, I can, if people are thinking, I will provide just so we all know, I'm going to provide an update on the polls. It looks like, just so everyone knows, we got 11% utilities in the room, 5% government, 11% professional, scientific, and technical services. And then the domestic international stayed the same. I will say it does look like, so the plurality of people have 31 plus employees. So dedicated full-time. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Um,
That's great. That's great. And, you know, there's a lot of lessons just to be learned with your team. I found that my team was just very much a microcosm of what a lot of our organization was feeling. And so making sure that they remain engaged and excited is also very important, particularly if they're in the compliance function. We just have to be standard bearers. We have to be the individuals that are leading from our values and encouraging other people to do the same. But when you feel that fatigue and that frustration on your teams, it can be difficult. But you also have those diverse opinions. I've got some that are, hey, I will stay working remote as long as I possibly can. Others that are eager to get back to back to the office. And how do you balance all of that? You know, so it is a very unique season, but I do hope that, like me, many of you have learned a lot of lessons from it. So. But yeah, Aaron, if I have no further questions or observations, I'm happy to give folks a little bit of time back.
All right. Sounds good. Yeah, I think we're set. All right, everyone. Have a good rest of the conference.
Thanks all.